Hello everyone, and thank you for joining us today for this Rail Ambition webinar. I'm Jean Craig and I'll be your host this morning. Council has decided to host this webinar to bring together all the strong advocates for increased rail connectivity in Derry City and Strabane district and the wider Northwest. We hope that this morning will enhance this conversation in the context of the Strategic Growth Plan and the All-Island Strategic Rail Review. We hope that over the course of the webinar, you'll receive a real insight into how we can transform rail connectivity here in the Northwest. In the first half of the event, we'll be hearing from Ministers Mallon and Ryan, Derry City and Strabane District Council, Translink and the Department for Infrastructure. We'll then have a short break at 11:10, followed by discussion from Into the West and Donegal Railway Heritage Centre, and a really interesting case study from Borders Railway in Scotland about how they reopened after nearly half a century. We also want you at home to get involved. We have two opportunities for audience interaction. You'll see the Q&A box on your screen. So if you have a question for our speakers, just pop it in there and I'll do my best to read out as many as possible during our Q&A segments. We'll also be adding some interesting links in the chat box. So for more information on rail in the Northwest, you can keep an eye on that chat box. Secondly, there'll also be a poll running during the event. Beside the chat box, you'll see a poll icon. The poll will remain open until the end of the webinar. The poll considers the 6 goals of the All-Island Strategic Rail Review and asks which are most important to you. Multiple options can be selected. Now, the first stage of the review consultation process has closed, but the stakeholders can use today's feedback as they continue in the further stages of the review process. Also, just to let you know, we will be recording this event. I'd now like to welcome our Mayor, Alderman Graham Warke, to officially open the Rail Ambition webinar.
Thank you, Jean. Good morning, everyone. As Mayor of Derry City's Strabane District Council, I am delighted to officially welcome you here today to our Rail Ambition webinar. I'd like to thank you for giving your time and agreeing to participate in this important conversation about rail, which is a crucial issue here in the Northwest. Derry City and Strabane District Council agreed in a recent council meeting that it would host a seminar to discuss how we can advance the development of the rail in the Northwest. This seminar has been arranged to reinforce council support for the rail expansion, and we know that enhanced rail connectivity will help achieve a balanced regional development and drive social, economy and environmental well-being. It will also help achieve our climate emergency pledge and the green transformation of this city and district. Local people need more sustainable transport options, and we need to reduce our reasons of our cars and getting around. But we need to enhance the connectivity to make this happen. I am delighted that today we have secured inputs from Minister Mallon, Minister Ryan, and are joined by officials from the Department of Infrastructure and Translink. I also would like to thank all the local groups who have been tirelessly campaigning for the enhanced rail connectivity in the Northwest for many years. I hope that this webinar will add value to your campaign and demonstrate Council's output for your support for this echoes. Indeed, we have a long history of passion for the rail in the city and district. It's hard to believe that we actually had a real connectivity between Belfast, reaching a town in 1845 from Londonderry, Strabane, and the largest rail junction in Ireland during the first half of the 20th century. The Londonderry to Cllr line is regarded internationally for its coastal views with Downhill Beach, Benevena and the Foy Esquire, and it was famously described by Michael Mallon as one of the most beautiful rail journeys in the world, and in 2016 was listed 7th in the 10 most breathtaking railway journeys across the UK. This seminar comes in the context of important policy developments both ministers recently launched with the All-Ireland Strategy Rail Review. We all have submitted detailed consultations, responses in the initial stages to review the hope that the ministers will consider the social, economy and environmental impacts of connecting the West beyond the cost based on the status quo. I am therefore delighted that we have secured input from Councillor Bell from the Scottish Borders Council, who has led a successful campaign to bring in rail to the Scottish border region. Councillor Bell's project has clearly demonstrated that the business case should consider wider social and economic factors in deciding to provide real investment and to connect regions. We have a lot to learn from his example. The seminar has also been converted into the context to review the strategy growth plan. Stakeholders and consultations have demonstrated that this plan needs to be stronger, and the call for enhanced rail connectivity and discussion today to complement the review. The Council has also set up an all unelected members rail working group to add further focus into important issues. Many of the members of the rail working group are on the webinar today, and the group has plans for further engagements with the rail lobby groups in the coming months to continue this important conversation with them. So today's event is aimed at bringing together the key voices associated with the rail expansion in the city and district. We have come so far and are delighted to have our new multimodal transport hub. We have a long history of strong partnership working in this region, and we know we can only improve the consultation by working together with the ministers, our department and local people, our stakeholders, and achieve our vision. I hope that you will find this morning useful, and I am now delighted to introduce the Minister of Infrastructure for Northern Ireland, Nichola Mallon, and Minister Eamon Ryan, the Minister of Transport for the Republic of Ireland, who will provide us with a short pre-recorded message. Thank you.
Since coming into office, I have been clear that my priority is addressing regional imbalance, better connecting communities, and importantly, ensuring that we shape our places around our people, for our people, and with our people. There are many benefits to investing in our rail network. Transport underpins our quality of life and chances of economic success. Our rail network plays a key role in making the North a more attractive place to visit, live, work and do business. That means giving people and businesses more and better choices about when, where and how to travel. For too long though, we have not been ambitious or courageous enough. We have to think bigger, not least because we need to tackle the climate crisis, grow our island economy and improve connectivity, not just across the North, but right across our island. With this in mind, I, along with Minister Eamon Ryan, jointly launched the All-Ireland Strategic Rail Review to take a strategic view on the decision-making and investment in our rail network. As part of this work, I have ensured that the New Decade New Approach commitment to consider the feasibility of high-speed rail between Belfast, Dublin and Cork is now expanded to include Derry and Limerick. There are real opportunities for communities across the island and significant benefits that better connections could bring, not just to people, but also for our environment and economy. The All-Ireland Strategic Rail Review, when complete, will allow us to consider our network across this island to view how we can improve it for everyone. In practical terms, I have sought to address the years of underinvestment in the North West. My department has invested over £100 million in major rail projects to the North West. That included phases 1 and 2 of the Cllr to Derry track relay project, totalling over £70 million, and investment in the North West Transport Hub amounting to over £27 million. My department also invested £68 million in new trains that will help to increase capacity across the network, including on the Cllr to Derry line. However, much more work is required to deal with the lack of investment west of the Bann, and particularly how rail connectivity needs developed into the North West. With that in mind, I have also commissioned a feasibility study to get phase 3 of the Derry to Cllr rail line back on track. I'm pleased to confirm that the study is now complete and a business case is being produced so that this important project for the people of Derry and beyond can be progressed at long last. I have also commissioned further studies to examine the options for new halts and associated park and ride facilities at Strathfoyle, Eglinton, City of Derry Airport and Ballykelly. This study will also examine the possibility of introducing half-hourly services to Derry, and this report is due to be completed by this summer. I am excited about the future of rail for the North West, and I want to ensure that my ambitions for the North West, for rail, are not derailed. We need to keep progress for the North West, for rail connectivity on our island, on track. Together, we can deliver this reality. Together, we can transform our island, and after too many years of delay and decay, it's long past time we get on with the job.
Thank you to Nichola Mallon for that message. We will now hear from the Minister for Transport, Climate, Environment and Communications, Eamon Ryan, TD.
Hello. I'd like to start by thanking the Chief Executive and the Council for inviting me to speak to this webinar. I very much welcome the opportunity to speak to you all today about the All-Ireland Strategic Rail Review. I think this is the first time that such a review has been conducted on an all-island basis, and as such, it will consider the potential of rail from a different perspective to reviews of the past. That all-island perspective will allow us to look afresh at issues such as rail connectivity to the northwest and interconnection between our cities, Derry, Belfast, Dublin. As you know, there's a strong political commitment to this review, both within the Irish Government and the Northern Ireland Executive, and between myself and my counterpart, Minister Mallon. I'm a firm believer in the potential of rail and how it can add to the development, social and otherwise, of our country and island. Potential it provides greater connectivity and also meet our climate goals. It's essential that we identify real constraints in the sector and then balance our decarbonisation priorities, getting good rural connectivity and economic development. The Strategic Rail Review will assist us in informing that. As well as considering the role of rail in addressing our climate targets, the review will consider the potential of rail freight and the future of what's sometimes called lightly used lines. And in that regard, it will consider the potential scope for improved rail services and infrastructure around the various existing or potential new lines. Another area of focus for the review, and perhaps of interest to the Council, will be examining better connectivity to the northwest. I understand that the recently concluded public consultation process attracted a huge number of responses, with many people, individuals or interest groups hailing from the northwest of the island having a view. Arab consultants who are undertaking the review are currently considering all submissions. This important part will offer us insight on what are the views, expectations and hopes for interested stakeholders. To conclude, the All-Ireland Strategic Review will be a hugely significant moment. It allows us to consider from an all-Ireland perspective and look at the real strategic way in which rail can be part of our development of our island. Along with Minister Mallon, I look forward to the findings from the recent public consultation process and to the outcome of this most important review. I thank you again for this opportunity and wish you well with your webinar. Thank you.
Thank you to Eamon Ryan for that message. We are now going to move on to our stakeholder contributions. In this segment, we'll be hearing from the Council, DFI and Translink representatives who will each speak for 10 minutes before the first of our audience Q&As. So I've seen there's a few questions have already gone in there. Feel free to add any as we go along, and we'll work through as many as we can during the Q&A section. I'd like to introduce Karen Phillips, Director of Environment and Regeneration at Derry City and Strabane District Council. Karen leads delivery of a wide range of services, including waste management, street cleansing, parks development, planning, capital development, building control and regeneration. Karen also leads the development of the major regeneration city deal projects on Derry's riverfront and in Strabane Town Centre, and a range of other key council capital projects. Karen leads Council's approach to environmental stewardship and sustainability and engages with partner organisations on delivering green transformation in the Northwest City region. So Karen, you're very welcome.
Good morning.
Good to see you, Karen. Tell me, how critical is rail improvement to our economic, social, environmental regeneration here in Derry and Strabane?
Good morning, Jean-Anne, and good morning to everyone who's joining us on the webinar today to discuss our ambitions for the future of rail in the Northwest City region. It's fantastic to see our key speakers and to see so many people attending, and we'll try and get through as many of the points as we can as we move along. Jean-Anne, this seminar came from a notice of motion to Derry City and Strabane District Council last year, which was supported unanimously by all our councils and has also been supported by the members of our all-party rail working group, which was set up to allow the members of Derry City and Strabane District Council to champion and encourage rail development in the region. Rail improvement is very critical to the economic, social and environmental regeneration of the Northwest City region and its future role in delivering sustainable, balanced regional development on the island of Ireland. We live in a city and region where considerable progress and improvement has been made in recent years, but where a legacy of underinvestment, peripherality, and poor infrastructure and public transport, in particular rail connectivity, continues to restrain development and prosperity relative to the other cities on the island. Investment in suitable and adequate rail provision to, from and within our region on a decide and provide basis is vital to enable us to tackle this inequality. So, Jean-Anne, very critical.
Good, thank you, Karen. Tell me about Council's response to the All-Ireland Strategic Rail Review. There's some really ambitious proposals there. Of all the ones that you've called for, Karen, which do Council feel are top priority?
Okay, well, Council welcomed the strategically important consultation and we were delighted to contribute to it. We highlighted the Northwest City region as the fourth largest on the island of Ireland and the only cross-border functioning economic metropolitan area on the island, and the only city region straddling the UK-EU border. We highlighted the legacy of underinvestment in poor public transport and the impact that this has had on restraining development and prosperity, and how it has led to the highest levels of poverty and social deprivation in the country, and also high dependence on private modes of transport. We pointed out that as the region seeks to address these inequalities and to deliver on its potential on an equal terms with other cities on the island and to contribute to national objectives and challenges, enhanced and efficient rail connectivity to, from and within the region is vital. Council is currently leading on the review of its strategic growth plan for the area. And one of the emerging actions under the outcome, we connect people through our infrastructure, is the provision of enhanced rail services and connectivity to Belfast, Dublin and Donegal, and improved connectivity to and from the City of Derry Airport, and the further development of facility services and accessibility at Foylport. Jean-Anne, Council have called for transformational step change to the poor existing rail connectivity to Derry, our wider council area and the Northwest. And we believe that this is needed to address the stark rail infrastructure deficit and to deliver the sustainable, low carbon, regionally balanced economic future and quality of life necessary for our citizens and our businesses to flourish. Historically, rail was provided to areas that countries wanted to grow, and we believe that this must now be the case for rail in the Northwest. What we've called for, Jean-Anne, Council has called for increased speed and frequency to and from Belfast and the seamless onward connections to and from Dublin on the existing line, direct connections to and from Derry and Dublin via Strabane and Omagh, connections to and from Derry to Letterkenny and onwards to Sligo, Galway and the Atlantic Corridor. Suburban rail services centred on Derry with services to and from Strabane, Letterkenny, Cllr and all the halts and services that tie in our communities across the region. and particularly halts and services to and from City of Derry Airport, and direct connections to halts and stations at Belfast International Airport and Dublin Airport. I think, Jean-Anne, these are our priorities, and we believe that they all need to be developed and they all need to be delivered. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. What would you say are the next steps then? We've got these great ambitions and we hope they come true, but what are the next steps from Council's point of view?
Okay, well, firstly, I think we need acceptance by the governments of the case laid out by Council, which is outlining the need for enhanced rail services to, from and within the city region. And following on from that, a commitment to funding and implementation of the proposals to get them to the stage, the next steps of towards delivery. And I think we also need a realisation that the development needs to be based on the potential of the city and region to basically accommodate projected population growths on the island, while also delivering on obligations to balance regional development and climate change. We look forward to hear from central government on the timetable for the next steps, and we hope that that will be as soon as possible. Thank you.
Karen, with that in mind, what's the risk if rail improvement happens too slowly or isn't extensive enough? How will this impact the Northwest?
Okay, well, I think that if rail improvement is too slow or if it isn't extensive enough, we'll miss another opportunity to balance regional development, to tackle climate change and to reverse the economic underperformance of the region. This risks perpetuating the legacy of poverty and poor outcomes for our people and our businesses in the area. Investment in rail, Jean-Anne, we believe will help us to become a net contributor to national economies. And we will continue to champion the rail improvements and will engage and support central government in Northern Ireland, in the Republic of Ireland and the UK to ensure the improvements are delivered as quickly as possible. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Karen. I can see from our chat box and the Q&A box that there's plenty of questions coming in there, which is great. Just also a quick reminder about our poll for which of the 6 strategic rail review aims are you most in favour of, or you view as most important, and I can see lots of people getting involved in that as well. Karen, I'm now going to introduce John Glass. John is the Director of Infrastructure and Projects at Translink. John is responsible as Infrastructure Manager for the rail network and properties throughout Northern Ireland, including the delivery of rail projects. John is a past chair of the Institution of Civil Engineers in Northern Ireland and a member of the Railway Engineers Association in the UK and Ireland. John is going to share some slides with us now to illustrate his presentation. John, you're very welcome, and it's over to you.
Thank you, Jean-Anne. Thanks very much, everyone, for the invite to come along this morning and be part of your Rail Ambition webinar and the future of rail in the Northwest. There is, without question, untapped potential for further rail development in the Northwest, and without question to social and economic development, and it would increase the connectivity between communities and tackle the climate change emergency. Next slide, please. The investment in the rail sector in the last 5 to 6 years in the Northwest has started to address years of underfunding to halt the decline of railways in that area and also to rebuild the rail network. When we consider that our rail network was cut in half in the 1950s, it has had a dramatic loss to the communities in those areas. We are also the only region in the UK without electrification. And just like any other part of the UK and Ireland, investment in rail links has always exceeded demand forecasts in business cases. And we're delighted in the investment that DFI have provided in the last 5 to 6 years the Cllr to Derry Phase 2, the Northwest Transport Hub and the associated Greenway, the introduction of the early service, the new trains 3 which have been introduced, and the ones that have been introduced to date are predominantly on the Belfast or the Derry line. So we have seen probably close to £150 million worth of investment in the last 5 or 6 years. But with that has come increased passenger numbers. We have seen more frequent services, more reliable services. We have seen the excellent hub facilities that have been provided and the associated Greenway, which has encouraged active travel and cycling. We have seen 4 to 5 times the number of people using that Greenway in active travel than was predicted in the business case. But more is required, and Translink have demonstrated their ability to deliver transformational railway projects and enhancements and services in that time. But more is required to level up those years of underinvestment in vital rail infrastructure. We need to see economic and social decline turning into growth, and rail is one way of ensuring that happens. Next slide, please. What are we continuing to do for the Northwest Rail? Well, the Minister mentioned Phase 3. Phase 3A is, we're looking, you can see the line as it runs from Derry to Cllr, the piece in the yellow, which is 20 miles of life expired track, which requires a full renewal. It's an essential renewal. So we have just completed the feasibility study for that, and we have submitted the outline business case to the department at the end of last year. This work is critical to ensure the future-proofing of a railway that is safe and reliable to the Northwest going forward. Next slide, please. We're also working at a feasibility study for Phase 3B, which looks at providing the infrastructure to enable us to run half-hourly services between Derry and Cllr. Also to look at the new halts in that route and consider the feasibility for those in business cases. This feasibility study is due to be complete at the end of this summer, and we would plan to submit the outline business case to the Department for Infrastructure at the start of the autumn. Next slide, please. Northern Ireland Railways require investment which will transform rail in terms of speed, frequency, resilience, looking at electrification and modern high-performing rolling stock. So we are currently looking at a programme of works from Derry to Belfast that will look at a series of dualling and passing loops. You can see some in the red there, to enable faster speeds, reduce journey times, to enable more resilience, to increase the frequency. And this study is ongoing at the moment. We have submitted a mandate to the department for approval in December last year, and our plan is to submit a strategic outline business case next year. This study will be the start of a journey of transformation between Derry and Cllr and Belfast, and it will help us to achieve Translink's 2040 target of zero emissions. Next slide, please. In Translink, we welcome the All-Ireland Strategic Rail Review and also the outcome of the Union Connectivity Review. We do believe that a joined-up approach is required in Ireland between Irish Rail and Northern Ireland Railways to look at how we jointly together provide an enhanced network in Ireland. But as the other speakers have said, there is more ambition required. We need more ambition and more vision. the government and the executive need to be supporting long-term planning of how we can fund and transform our railway, how we can provide a railway that will help people to shift from car to rail. We need to see the improved connectivity between airports, seaports, and provide important modal interchanges along the rail network. We need to see the reopening of closed lines in England and Wales. There's a £500 million fund for restoring railways. We don't have it in Northern Ireland, so we need some form of funding that enables to look at restoring those railway lines that were closed in the 1950s. We do have a devolved government which has the policy levers to develop our rail infrastructure and facilitate that economic and social growth that we need. However, I think one of the key things, not just ambition, is how we make those investment decisions going forward. Too often, the current investment decision-making tools are not ambitious enough, or they don't look at the strategic manner in how we should consider rail in Northern Ireland. So often, passenger numbers are looked at in a pessimistic way, and that in turn means that many projects have cost-cutting exercises completed on them, which leads to a capping or a strangling of passenger numbers in the future. And finally, funding. There is funding opportunities from the UK Union Connectivity Study for levelling up. We need to be taking advantage of it for Northern Ireland, and just to expose the potential of rail that is untapped in Northern Ireland, and importantly, to meet those climate change objectives by transferring people from car to rail. Finally, I would say that in all of this, we've been considering capital expenditure and the need for more capital money. Currently, the cost of running the existing rail in Northern Ireland is 70 million a year to stand still, and we don't have that amount of revenue funding yet. So not just is there an ambitious need to grow our railway and develop and enhance it, but also to provide the required revenue money to support it. Thank you, Janan.
John, thank you very much. That was a really interesting presentation. And of course, we'll be hearing from yourself, Karen and Jackie in the Q&A later. I can see some more questions coming in as we speak. So yeah, thanks again, John, for that presentation. I'd now like to introduce you all to Jackie Robinson. As Director for Public Transport in the Department of Infrastructure, Jackie is responsible for the sponsorship of Translink, as well as having responsibility for accessible and community transport, including the policy and operation of the concessionary fares scheme and providing funding to community transport providers. In addition, she is responsible for the contract to provide lifeline ferry services to Rathlin, the operation of the permit system for public transport operators, and grant funding to the Inclusive Mobility and Transport Advisory Committee. Jackie, you're very welcome.
Thank you very much, Gina. Thank you for the opportunity to come today to talk. For me, it's important not only to be able to present the department's view on rail ambition for the Northwest, but also very much to listen to the stakeholders' view on how important this is, and to get your views, and the views of people who have dialed in this morning. As Minister Mallon said, we want to do a really good job on the rail review, and it's important that we do this as a co-design piece with people. So I'm very much open to hear views today and to take those on board as we go through this piece of work.
Great, thank you. And yeah, we've had a fantastic response to the webinar. So thanks for everybody for attending and sharing your views with us. Jackie, you mentioned there the strategic rail review. The public consultation was recently completed, and I know you're probably still sifting through all the responses, but can you tell us a bit about the response that you've had?
Yeah, Gina, the response has been colossal. We have had a fantastic response with about 6,700 submissions received. And this demonstrates to me how important the whole subject is to everyone on the island of Ireland. I haven't got the full analysis yet, as you can understand with that number of submissions. It's going to take a wee while to work through them. But what I do know is that responses from Northern Ireland totaled 54% of those responses, and Derry City and Strabane District Council was the second largest council area by response rate. It clearly demonstrates to me how important this is to the people of the council area and how important those people view the rail network. So the consultation closed on the 21st of January, and work has been ongoing since then to look at the review and the number of submissions. We have yet to receive the full analysis of that, but I actually have a meeting with the consultants later on this week, and we'll start to get a bit more feedback at that stage. But it is important, and what we are starting to see coming through is that the things that have been highlighted are all island connectivity between major cities and enhancing regional and rural accessibility. The responses also demonstrate the difference between the rural and urban split, and the key for the review will be to consider how rail can meet those urban and rural routes and meet the needs of citizens. Minister Mallon, as she's already said earlier, is ambitious for this review and believes that the input of citizens across the island is vital in how we shape our rail network. In that regard, it's important that the project team take this bit of time to make sure that that assessment is complete and to make sure that the analysis is thorough. We want to ensure that the views of people across the island of Ireland are taken on board, and that will allow us to make sure, as I've already said, that the process is one through very much a co-design piece.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Did you say 6,700?
Yes.
Responses, Jackie? That's amazing. So tell me as well, what is next for the rail review? When can we expect things to actually physically start happening here in the Northwest?
Yeah, well, I have to say, since coming into office, Minister Mallon has been very clear that it's her priority to address regional imbalance, tackle the climate crisis, and better connect communities across Ireland. If she had her way, this would have been done and all. Unfortunately, we need to take time and go through process. And again, we really wanted to hear people's views to help inform that. So she is very ambitious for the All Island Rail Network and believes that it has massive untapped potential to deliver multiple benefits across the island, including rail to the Northwest. In terms of the next steps, following the closure of the public consultation phase, all the submissions will now be considered by the project team. This will allow the review to progress with a final report currently projected to be published in the last quarter of 2022. To that end, we don't want to prejudge the outcome of the review. Once it's complete, it will be for the ministers, both North and South, to agree on the priorities of how we take forward the recommendations from that review. However, in saying that, we recognise that the completion of the review is 6 to 9 months away, and that hasn't stopped Minister Mallon taking steps to begin the process of improving rail in the Northwest, as John has very clearly articulated already. Minister has brought phase 3 upgrade to the Derry and Cllr line back on track, no pun intended. The Minister prioritised this work, and the feasibility study is now complete. The business case does have to go through the necessary approval process, but is being treated with a lot of urgency within the department. In addition, Minister has also commenced another feasibility study to look at the additional halts and the passing loops between Belfast and Derry corridors, with a view to bringing in the half-hourly service that John discussed earlier. So we're very much on track. We're not waiting until the review is complete before we do anything, but we do need to wait before we make further strategic decisions, so that, as other speakers have already said, decisions in relation to rail, which are expensive infrastructure pieces of work, are made looking at the whole strategic picture and making sure that the decisions we make are justified and clearly demonstrate our commitment to things like climate change and modal shift, getting people onto public transport and really connecting our communities.
Thank you, Jackie. There are 6 aims in the strategic rail review, as we know from the poll that's going on here today. They're decarbonisation, improve all island connectivity between major cities, enhance regional and rural accessibility, encourage sustainable mobility, foster economic activity, and achieve economic and financial feasibility. What, in your department's point of view, Jackie, are the key priorities amongst those 6?
I don't want to preempt, and actually we put all of those in because I can see merit in every single one. So I'm not going to prejudice the outcome of the consultation, although I'm really interested to hear the feedback at the end of today and what people see those the priorities to be. They're all important, and rail and public transport in general are enablers. So it impacts our everyday lives across the island, and therefore it can benefit a wide range of people and places as we seek to improve Northern Ireland socially, economically, and environmentally. At this early stage, we can see the responses have highlighted that improving connectivity between major cities and enhancing regional and rural services and accessibility have proven to be the most important for our citizens, and that's in the feedback we've received in the written submissions. So as I've already said, it'll be interesting to see whether that reflects what's coming through today. As I noted earlier, it is interesting that it shows a clear focus on both rural and urban connectivity. So in line with that, the review will also highlight that sustainability and decarbonisation are probably important, and those are important things coming through.
Yeah, on that note, let's talk about sustainability and decarbonisation. Of course, it's key to all future transport plans here and globally. What role does rail have to play in that?
Rail is obviously a key part in the decarbonisation. And the more people use it, the more we can reduce our emissions by removing private cars from the roads. You'll be aware the review is considering the decarbonisation of the network. So while we continue to strive for modal shift, we'll also work to reduce the emissions on our rail network, and the longer term goal for having a zero emission fleet, which John Glass has already mentioned. The Translink ambition would be to do that by 2040. The department is also focused on driving modal shift, and we see a hierarchy, and you can see that coming through in a couple of the departmental policy documents. So if you look at time for change, if you look at the energy strategy for Northern Ireland, you'll see that what we want to do at a high level is reduce the number of journeys people make, encourage then a modal shift to walking, cycling and public transport, and then looking at alternative for fuel sources. So all those things I think are covered within the All Island Rail Review, and rail in itself is an important enabler to that. Investing in rail connectivity is key to delivering a greener and cleaner transport system. And it also helps open up, as others have already said, the opportunities for connectivity and economic growth. We can see the work currently underway in the Northwest and how that has benefited for the green economy. So let's hope that continues.
Thank you, Jackie. Thank you for your time and talking us through that. And I can see we're actually slightly ahead of schedule, which is fantastic, because it means we have a wee bit more time for that first Q&A session. So I think at this point we'll bring in the rest of our panelists for the first half of our webinar. And of course, later on after our short break, we're going to be hearing from the sort of rail campaigners' point of view. So I think we'll go straight into our Q&A here. We've had loads of questions so far. Karen, this might be one for you from Mark Lusby. Most priorities of council have a dedicated subcommittee, officer and budget. Is the council intending to resource its ambition for rail in a similar way?
Thank you, and good morning, Mark. Well, yes, I suppose I covered in my comments earlier that council has already set up an all members rail working group to consider and to champion rail development in the Northwest. It is something that has been important to council since, I suppose, the amalgamation of the councils when Derry and City and Strabane District Council came in to force. I think increasingly over the last few years in particular, there has been more and more focus on it, and certainly at a senior officer level within council, both myself and the chief executive and some other chief and senior officers have spent quite a bit of time engaging with Translink, engaging with the department. You can see the seminar today, etc. Our elected members have had a number of meetings and a number of presentations from various interest groups in terms of this particular issue. And so certainly that is resource in itself, clearly. However, as we move forward, certainly depending on how this develops and what the particular ask of council is, then certainly I imagine our elected members will want to consider the resources that are needed in order to do that specifically. But certainly it's hugely exciting time, and I have no doubt that council will resource as needed as we move forward. Thank you.
Thanks, Karen. John, I think this might be one for yourself. When will Translink be opening the promised active transport facilities in the Northwest Multimodal Transport Hub?
Yeah, I think that COVID has affected the progress of some of the work in that area, but we're working very closely at the moment with Derry and Strabane Council and DFI with a possible tenant to go in there, and it looks very promising at the moment. But it's at early stages, and we would hope to get someone in as soon as possible. And we're aware that it is important because of the number of people that are cycling and walking on the Greenway. So working very hard with the other two bodies I mentioned there to get something moving as soon as possible.
That's great. Thank you, John. The strategic rail review all sounds very exciting, but how realistic is implementation given that the lion's share of infrastructural resources for the Northwest region is tied up in the A5 dual carriageway project? Isn't there a straightforward choice between either rail or road, but not both? There's an additional question there from the same speaker about climate change. The reality of statutory responsibilities in respect of climate change make rail the only possible option. So why is road being prioritised over rail? Jackie, would you feel able to take that one on?
Yeah, well, I would have to say things like the A5 have obviously been committed to for some time. One of the things that the department is doing is looking at a regional strategic transport plan, and that is currently being worked through. It will come out to consultation hopefully later on this year, and that will give people a chance to actually look at what the priorities should be over the next 10 or 15 years in terms of commitment of our fairly limited, I would have to say, capital budget. And I would encourage people, whenever that is available, to actually contribute to it and to make sure that their contributions are held. But I would also say that since we have committed to some of those big road projects, the whole focus of the department in terms of, as I've already mentioned, the likes of Time for Change and the energy strategy has moved to increasing the use of public transport, modal shift, to decrease the number of journeys. And we are starting to have conversations around things like 20-minute neighbourhoods. And those things will all factor into this. So but that said, I don't think there is a one size fits all. But we are looking at that in the bigger picture, and the All Island Strategic Rail Review will help to feed into that as well.
Thanks, Jackie. We have a question here from Mary Casey. This might be one for you, Karen. What alternatives for people movement other than roads investment is being allocated for the council district?
Yeah, well, if I start, and maybe Jackie can add to that, or John, and certainly I suppose just from a council perspective, in terms of other modes of travel and transport, we have always for probably 20 years now led on the development of Greenway provision and development across the region. We have had more than 90 kilometres of off-road Greenway, many of which council led on in partnership with various government departments and the EU to develop. We also have a further 50 kilometres that are in development at the minute, and we hope will be delivered over the next 2 years. So certainly in terms of, I suppose, that multimodal and mix of how people get around, certainly in the very short term and the sort of short distances, walking and cycling is obviously something that we really want to focus on. Certainly we as council have championed and worked, I suppose, with the Department for Infrastructure and Translink to consider how we have a public transport vision for the city, and that's certainly something that we believe that now we have our city deal proposals and really very, very huge transformative investment both along the riverfront and the walled city in Derry, but also in Strabane town centre, that the connectivity and the public transport strategy that is associated with that needs to be really well thought through. We've certainly worked with other cities and regions across the UK, for example, in Swansea, where they have done their major city deal proposals, but they hadn't really sort of factored in public transport and public transport needs at the very start of that. And they are furiously retrofitting in sort of greenways and public transport buses and rail networks. Now, obviously, their rail network is very different than ours, but certainly as council, we are fully committed to to sustainable development, first of all, for the city and district, but also in working in partnership with the DFI and Translink to make sure that there's a real and meaningful shift towards public transport, and that we provide all of the modes necessary for people to make that change easily, because it's if the services aren't available, or there's nowhere conveniently to park their cars in a park and ride, etc. If they need a car, it would be great if they didn't, but certainly we need to be providing the facilities and the services and also the infrastructure to people. And if we do, then there's huge opportunity for change within the region. Certainly the number of journeys by public transport at the minute is very, very small compared to what it could be. If it was massively increased because it was easy for people, then certainly that would have a massive benefit both for people themselves in their own health and well-being and ability to sort of get out into the environment, but also for our ability to have a functioning economic city and indeed Strabane town centre as well. So certainly from council, we've always felt that was very, very important, and we've been doing the best that we can to try and ensure that that's incorporated into our major strategic regeneration plans as we move forward.
Thanks, Karen. Jackie, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, just to very quickly build on some of the things that Karen has pointed out. I've already referred to our Regional Strategic Transport Network Transport Plan, or the RSTNTP, really catchy phrase in there, and that will go out to consultation hopefully later on this year. In addition to that, there is a separate Northwest Transport Plan, and it will also seek to look at the detail of local transport services in the area, and the department looks forward to working with the council in relation to that. One of the other things that I've already mentioned is Time for Change document and the energy strategy, and the focus where the department is now looking at changing modal shift and looking at public transport as an enabler. One of the things coming out of the energy strategy is that the department has committed to delivering a local transport strategy with a focus on local transport choices and behaviour. The strategy will include measures that will which will invest in infrastructure supporting active travel and public transport provision, and also to look at demand management measures to restrict the use of private cars. And this is maybe something as we go into the future that we'll need to think about more. So restricting the use of private cars in town centres, discouraging their use for commuter purposes where other viable options exist. And it's making sure that we have those viable options in there, as Karen has already alluded to.
Thanks, Jackie. Question from Tim Webster. Hi, Tim. This might be one for you, John, but feel free, anyone, to chip in. Given the extensive housing and educational developments at Cllr in Derry, could a halt be constructed at Grantia to ease traffic congestion for commuters?
As part of our study at the moment for halts between Cllr and Derry, we're looking at all the groups of where people live, where developments are going to be made, what size those will be, and how they could be suitable for halts in the current study. That study will be completed by the end of the summer. So we're not there yet. We are taking account of all the developments ongoing between Derry and Cllr in that study. Thank you.
Thanks, John. Niall McCullough is asking a cross-border question about the rail network. And we'll actually, just to flag, we'll be hearing from Jim McBride later on from the Donegal Railway Heritage Centre about that kind of cross-border connection. Would Donegal Town be included in the possible extended network?
Do you want me to come in on that, Tina?
Yeah, sure.
So the All-Ireland Rail Review is looking at all options for connections between our towns and our regions. So if there has been an appetite for that in the submissions that came in, then it will be considered along with everything else as part of that.
Thanks, Jackie. Andrew Bratton has asked, have DFI considered decarbonisation of the rail network and potential electrification of the railway as a significant contributor to energy storage solutions required by the electricity systems operator to balance peaks and troughs in renewable energy generation, e.g. wind?
I'm going to ask John to answer this one.
Okay. No, we're probably 75% of our way through our electrification technical study for Northern Ireland, and we will know the outcome of that soon, but it would drive us towards 25 kV electrification, particularly of the cross-border routes, and then some of the other routes would possibly be a mixture of electrification and battery because of some of the physical infrastructure that's already there. And we are looking in conjunction with NIE at the moment in terms of how we would supply that electrification feed across the province. And it will involve probably some micro generation of electric in Translink properties, and also storage of that energy to feed into the network. And we've been working closely with Transport for Wales, who are currently probably a year down this journey, and it's a very similar network. So in another 3 or 4 months, we will know the outcome of that study. But without doubt, to achieve the 2040 net zero target that Translink are aiming for, electrification is necessary. Electrification would also bring reduced journey times, because fleet can perform much better acceleration, deacceleration. So not only is there a climate benefit, but if we're looking to improve journey times between Dublin and Belfast and Derry and Belfast, electrification is necessary. Okay.
Thanks, John. Yeah, we're definitely looking to improve those journey times here in the Northwest. Tell me, this is quite a technical one, John. I don't know, this might be one for you as well, about the electrification. that the authorities are thinking in terms of high cost overhead electrification. Have we considered rechargeable battery electric trains?
Yes, that's what I was saying earlier. In the cross-border areas, it would be most likely overhead for the majority of the route. But for lines like Belfast to Derry and Cllr to Derry, because of the existing infrastructure, the trains would be bimodal, which would mean part of the journey they would be in contact with an overhead line, and then the rest of the journey they would use battery propulsion, and that battery then would get recharged when it comes back in touch with the overhead line.
Great, thank you, John. We've a comment here from Councillor Lorna Bogue, all the way from down in Cork City Council. Thank you, Lorna, for joining us today. She is a councillor with Cork City Council, and she says we have similar issues on lack of progress on rail improvements. I would love to learn more about the work of the rail working groups, and I think it would be great if our cities work together on this issue. On that note, Lorna, there's lots of links along in that chat box there to both websites and some contact details and things of how you can keep that conversation going. With regards to the pre-recorded messages by Ministers Ryan and Mallon, that was from a logistical point of view in the organising of today's event, and I think Jackie has supplied some contact details and links if there are further inquiries to DFI, which we'll be sharing over the course of the webinar.
Jeanne, if I can just add that we will make contact with Lorna and provide her with the details of our all-party rail working group, and indeed just to let people know that we have established links with Cork in other areas as well. They sort of, I suppose, learn from them, and they can learn from us as the two second cities, but certainly more than happy to continue those conversations. Thank you.
Thanks, Karen. Rachel has asked about the strategic rail review. Was Derry City and Strabane district the second largest council area for responses to the strategic rail review in Northern Ireland, or on an all-island basis?
My understanding, it was on an all-island basis. So well done, Derry and Strabane District Council, punching way above your weight on that one.
Well done, Joss. Helen Gormley, I think this is one for Translink. John, are Translink currently giving due consideration to extend the rail link to the northwest through the mid-southwest region, Armagh, Banbridge and Craigavon Borough Council, Fermanagh, Omagh District Council and Mid-Ulster District Council?
Armagh Council are completing their own feasibility study at the moment, as far as I'm aware, but those routes will all form part of the All-Ireland Rail study, and I think they're important routes and they need to be considered seriously in the All-Ireland study.
Okay. Can the panel give a timescale on the steps needed to begin the introduction of a railway link, and when will this process be going out to the public for consideration? This is with regard to since the idea of the A5 came to this stage, the world has changed beyond recognition. The same arguments do not stand up today. So do we have a timescale on those steps for the introduction of a railway link?
I think that would go back to the All-Ireland Rail study again. We'll be looking at that and what needs to be done going forward. But I think in the interim, it's important that councils are preventing development on existing rail lines such as those, so that if the All-Ireland Rail study does push in that direction, which hopefully it does, that there isn't development that prevents the rail links being re-established.
Great, thanks, John. A question about the annual reports to each individual council by the DFI outlining the developments of the year. I have yet to see any reference to public transport, bus and rail in these reports. Could this not be the opportunity each year to update councils? Jackie, that might be one for yourself.
Yeah, those reviews tend to focus more on the road network, but yeah, that's a really good idea, and it's one I'll take back.
Great. I'll try and group together some of the the sustainability, environmental questions here, because it's obviously crucial to the rail journey we're on. Maeve O'Neill, urgency is key in the face of the climate crisis. How can we progress this more urgently, given the proposed length of time it might take to just get phase 3 done? In England, a new line took 9 months to be in operation from agreement at government level. And Derek has asked, in considering any rail improvement, can we take it that decarbonisation, social and economic benefits will be taken into account? Will the feasibility study include these factors? So maybe let's start with Maeve's question on the time frame. A new line took 9 months in England. Is that an ambitious target, or is that an achievable one here as well?
I think we have to think about the part of the process is around getting the money. So there is a length of time, and I'm assuming that 9 months was from approval was given. Now, in relation to the work that needs to be taken in this phase 3 in the next stage, there is a considerable amount of work to be done. And I will let John give the detail of that, because it does get quite technical, but it is likely to take a good period of time, and that includes things like the procurement phase. I don't know, John, if you want to give a wee bit more detail around that.
Yeah, I suppose our steps for something like phase 3 are, once the funding's approved, then we need to finalise the detailed design, appoint contractors, and procure key materials for relaying 20 miles of railway. So that probably is part of the thing that takes the time, is procurement, detailed design, procurement of materials, and then you're ready to start on site. I would say that 9 months referred to the period they were on site, as opposed to all the things that happened beforehand, like procurement and design and so on. I'd certainly be interested in talking to those people. If they could do something in 9 months, we would employ them. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you, John. We are nearly running out of time.
Can I just comment on that comment in relation to taking decarbonisation, social and economic benefits into account? And I think really just from a council perspective, that was, I suppose, one of the key points that we were making in our response as council to the consultation document. And really, I suppose it's that whole aspect of needing to provide services on a decide and provide basis, rather than, I suppose John touched on it earlier, a more traditional business model of the number of people who can or might use the services. And certainly we believe that decarbonisation and the social and economic benefits should be very highly prioritised when we're deciding, I suppose, where to provide the services, what railways to either reopen or open for the first time, and the massive challenges that we have in terms of future population growth on the island of Ireland, and making sure that we have an infrastructure strategy and an infrastructure plan that actually helps to balance regional development, that doesn't in effect grow the donut around big cities any further. And sometimes traditional ways of assessing business cases could lead to that, because it's saying, oh well, if we extend this line a couple more kilometres, then X number of thousand more people might be able to use that line. But really the decide and provide model of saying, right, well, this is where we want future development to be obviously sustainable, and then actually investing in that is really, I suppose, flipping it over compared to some ways of assessing business cases. But we believe in this particular case that needs to be the case, and it needs to be transformational. Thanks.
Thank you, Karen. We're going to start wrapping up for our break now. I just want to read out a quick comment, because I know there were 1 or 2 comments there I didn't have time to read out. Pádraig Delargy, Sinn Féin MLA, as a member of the Infrastructure Committee, I'm happy to feed back any individual points to the committee if people want to get in touch directly. So we'll have to sort of wrap up our Q&A at this stage. We will be coming back later on with an opportunity for more audience questions. So thank you so much to everybody at home for submitting your questions. There were some really interesting ones in there, and thank you to the panel for answering them. For those of you who would like further information or whose question we didn't get time to answer, we are, as I said, adding links and contact details in the chat box. Just before our break, we are going to show a short video showcasing the completion of the Northwest Transport Hub. We're going to take a short break now. It's 11:12 and we'll be coming back at 11:20. So grab a break, and after the break we will hear from Into the West, Donegal Railway Heritage Centre and Scottish Borders Council. During the break, we're going to be sharing some interesting facts and figures about rail here in the Northwest and the benefits it can bring. And just a reminder, the poll is still open and accessible through the poll icon on the bottom of your screen. We will share the results of the poll at the end of the webinar. And we're going to, as I said, take our break now, and we'll see you back here at 11:20. Thank you. Hi everyone, welcome back. I don't know about you, I was enjoying that relaxing music there. Thank you for joining us for the second half of our Rail Ambition webinar. We're now going to be speaking to some of the campaigners who are passionate about transforming our rail provision here in the Northwest. We'll also be speaking to Stuart Bell from Scottish Borders Council to find out how people in the Scottish Borders made their rail ambition a reality. We will then have our second audience Q&A. So again, if you have a question for our panel, please do pop it in the Q&A box below. First up, I would like to introduce Steve Bradley, Chair of Into the West Campaign Group, who's going to share a presentation with us. I'm just going to read out Steve's bio for you here. Steve is Chair of Into the West, which is the rail campaign for counties Derry, Donegal, Tyrone and Fermanagh. He's also currently researching a PhD on sustainable transport at IT Sligo, the New Atlantic Technological University. So a busy man. Steve, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you very much, Jeananne. Thank you also to Will, who is doing the magic with the slides in the background. For anybody over the age of 30, he's going to be the Debbie McGee to my Paul Daniels act. So thank you very much, Will. Thank you also to everybody for tuning in today. It's been a good discussion, very interesting information so far. Hopefully I'll keep that going, and hopefully there'll be something of interest to listeners from what we have to say now. As mentioned, Into the West is the rail campaign for counties Derry, Donegal, Tyrone and Fermanagh. We were set up in 2004. We're a community-led organisation. We've traditionally been sort of battling to stop bad things happening to rail. We were set up in 2004 to prevent the railway line being closed entirely west of Ballymena. We played a key role in getting the new station for the city, for the Derry. And in the last few years, we've been really focusing on taking forward the agenda for rail and proposing ambitious expansions and improvements to what we currently have in the Northwest City region. And we're very grateful for all the support we've had on that from particularly the people of the region who are very supportive of rail, but also Council, Translink, Department for Infrastructure and other bodies who certainly support some of what we ask for. We have to acknowledge that there is some leaning forwards when it comes to better rail. I've got three things which I really want to talk to everybody about today. First slide, if we can, please, Will. The first of those is that the current situation regarding rail in the northwest of the island of Ireland is no longer acceptable. Next slide, please, Will. So we really are the forgotten region for rail, and we have two disparities. We get it in the neck from two different directions as a region. Firstly, within Northern Ireland, there is a very clear disparity in rail provision east and west of the River Bann. And then across the island as a whole, there's a clear disparity in provision between the northwest and the rest of the island. Next slide, Will. This is the situation in Northern Ireland. I'm sure a lot of you have seen this before. 54 railway stations in Northern Ireland. Only 3 of those are in the west, which is almost 30% of the population of Northern Ireland. Next slide, Will. And then this is how that aggregates up on an island basis. And you can see the huge hole there. This goes around in social media all the time. The point we're making is we need to be beyond the stage at which we're explaining why this needs to change. It now needs to be accepted that this has to change. that this is no longer acceptable. Next slide, Will. And even the stations that we do have near Derry and in the west are pretty much in the wrong place. Apart from Derry, the two other stations west of the Ban cover Castle Rock and Ballerina, which are small, lowly populated villages. And the railway line goes right past or very close to areas with much more significant population, such as Limavady and Eglinton. So even the stations we do have in the west are in the wrong place. Next slide, Will. So the status quo is no longer acceptable. First point, it just isn't. We shouldn't have to explain this anymore. And anybody who's watching this, and in particular amongst the stakeholders, who looks at those maps and thinks, and doesn't think this needs to change, they're in the wrong room, and they should probably be involved in different groups and different transports scenarios, because it is just no longer acceptable. And it was great to hear the huge response to the All-Ireland Rail Review consultation from people in Derry and Strabane. And I'm sure that again shows that people in our area, our region, just are no longer prepared to accept being the forgotten region for rail. Other regions, climate crisis, transport is the second largest contributor of greenhouse gas emissions. We need to shift people out of cars and onto rail. Regional balance, social justice, social exclusion, improving urban and rural quality of life. Lots of reasons why. Next slide, please, Will. Just two very quick things. The places in Northern Ireland which don't have rail also have the lowest car ownership. If you look at this, there's 3 areas in our council district which don't have, which have the highest percentages of households but have no access to a vehicle. And that includes small villages like Newton Stewart and Dunnamana. Next slide, Will. And then if you look at medium-sized towns, towns over 10,000, Strabane is top of the list for low car ownership. And the ones that are at the top of the list here, the top 7, none of them have rail. So they get it both ways. They don't have access to vehicles and they don't have proper alternative provision. Next slide, please, Will. And if you look at it on an all Northern Ireland basis, this is stark. The east-west split in accessibility of rail in Northern Ireland. This is no longer acceptable. Next slide, please, Will. So what change is required? Next slide, Will. Firstly, we need to look at improving what we currently have. Next slide, please. The problem is the existing line tries to do 2 things. It tries to be a commuter service for Belfast, but it also tries to be an intercity service for Derry. And you can't do both of those things on a single track route, because being a commuter service for Belfast means you need lots of stops close to Belfast, but that slows the service down and makes it not viable as a as an intercity service between Derry, Belfast and the rest of the island. And it's also resulted in Derry having a very isolated station. Next slide, please, Will. So if you look at what is around Belfast, there's a very viable, very meaningful network of commuter network of rail halts. And look at Derry. It's basically the city and then nothing until you hit 2 very small villages. Next slide, please. And Derry is the second most isolated rail station on the entire island. And if you look at that map, Cllr has 5 stations in a cluster around it. Cllr has 25,000 people. Derry has over 100,000 people and is extremely isolated on the rail network. Next slide, Will. So what happens on the line is that the Belfast commuter rule gets the priority. Hence, there's lots of stops around Belfast and none near to Derry. And that makes it a very slow service, and it also impacts frequency. So this is the the A6 improvements. The journey time by rail, end to end between Derry and Belfast, was 138 minutes. By car or by bus, it was 90 to 100 minutes. And that will get 10 minutes faster this summer when the A6 opens. Next slide, Will. And this is a really key point. Derry is the 2nd largest city in Northern Ireland, yet only the 13th busiest rail station. And this is the predictable outcome of the fact that the service from the city is too infrequent, and too slow. Antrim has less than a quarter of the population of Derry, yet significantly more people use rail there than from Derry. Anybody looking at these figures should say, well, there's something wrong here, what we need to fix. Instead, unfortunately, these figures are used to justify a worse level of provision for rail within Derry. So when we got the hourly service to Belfast introduced in 2018, we weren't given it on a Sunday. We only have 6 trains all day on a Sunday. And again, we're told, well, demand isn't there. Demand is the outcome of the structural problems within rail towards Derry. Next slide, please. So how do we change that? Firstly, we need to double track the Belfast line, the Derry to Belfast line. That will enable faster trains, a greater frequency of trains, and it will then enable extra halts to be added in between. And then following on from that, we need a northwest regional network. Rail needs to provide a commuter role around Derry. And we should also look at redirecting the railway line through Limavady as part of dualing the track. Next slide, Will. And a look at what that would mean. If you're in the top left-hand corner in the sort of pink color, these are the stations we're saying should be introduced, which would create a meaningful and viable commuter rail network to the east of Derry to act as a kind of a balance to what they have in Belfast. But again, this can't be done with single track. Next slide, please. So that's improving what we currently have. How about expanding what we currently have? Next slide. Anybody who follows us on social media will be aware of this. We're calling for rail to be restored between Derry and Portadown to provide a direct route through to Dublin. We're asking that Derry Letterkenny be reopened to connect the 2 largest cities in the northwest. We're asking that rail be restored to Fermanagh from Omagh on down to Sligo. And we're asking for the Western Rail Corridor, that necklace of rail from Limerick through Galway, Sligo, up through Donegal and into Derry. We're asking for that to happen as well. And next slide, Will, is basically a map of the things we're asking for. In red is the routes from the northwest to Dublin, green is to connect up through Fermanagh, and yellow is the Western Rail Corridor, plus Limavady in there, and connecting our airports to the railway as well. Next slide, please. And one of the interesting things this would enable, if you reopen Derry Portadown, you can bring in a loop service around Northern Ireland. We've called it the Heart of Ulster line. That might be cheesy, but it would link together 5 of Northern Ireland's 6 counties, half of its largest towns, and over 800,000 people, which is 42% of Northern Ireland's population, just by reopening one rail line and having a loop service around. Next slide, please, Will. And we would go from what we have today on the left, instead to having what is shown on the right, where we almost entirely plug that gap on the map. Next slide, please. So that's looking at what needs to change. So what is required to enable that? Next slide. Firstly, we need a sea change in outlook at Stormont and amongst the Northern Ireland Civil Service. Firstly, the spending priorities on transport and on regional balance, and within that on public transport in Northern Ireland, needs to change. We spend far too little on public transport in Northern Ireland, lower than anywhere else in the UK or in the Republic. We need to work with Westminster and the Republic government on getting the funding to enable these improvements to be made. But I really think we need to take rail more seriously within the civil service and within Stormont as a tool, not just for transport, but to deliver other government priorities. And it's important to mention as well, I'm concerned that if Stormont doesn't return after the next election, twice previously, when Stormont was down, the civil servants tried to basically pick apart Derry's rail service. In 2004, they tried to close it when Stormont was down, and it took a minister to stop that. And in 2019, they said they wouldn't complete phase 3 of the railway line repairs, and it took a minister to change that. So we need a sea change in Stormont and Northern Ireland Civil Service. Next slide, please. I'm wrapping up now in a second. What else is needed? We need councils to be much more proactive in this. Derry City Council has certainly got some good ideas on rail and is leaning forward, but we feel that us as a campaign group are having to grab this issue by the scruff of the neck and drag it forward. Councils should be doing that. They should be protecting former track beds, and we have a real problem in Derry at the moment with a proposed social housing building, because that hasn't happened. Councils should be themselves actively identifying routes where rail should go and putting together feasibility studies and working with other councils to help deliver that. And finally, Translink. I hope this doesn't sound unfair, but I honestly don't think Translink are hungry enough to get more passengers onto rail. I don't think they've done enough to make rail accessible to large towns where it runs close to, whether that be Limavady or Banbridge. I don't think they're innovative enough in terms of bringing in new products to attract people to rail. And I don't think they promote what they already have well enough, such as the Airlink connection from the railway services to Belfast International Airport. Next slide, please, Will. So finally, this is a summary of what our ambitions for rail are in the Northwest region. Double track the line, regional rail network for the Northwest, that's to improve what we have. And then all the expansions, which we've already mentioned, to the existing network to bring it to new areas. Next slide, Will. Final thought. In 2014, a cyclist beat the train to Belfast from Derry. In the years since, the railway line has not improved a jot in terms of journey time. We're about to get a dual carriageway road opening in the summer. I'm sure if this exercise was repeated, the cycle after that road reopens, the cyclist would even more comfortably beat the train. This is no longer acceptable and it has to change. Next slide, please. Thank you, Janan. Thank you, Will. Thanks to everybody for listening. Look forward to the questions later. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Steve, for that. It was really interesting discussion, and thank you for preparing the presentation. The slides really helped illustrate that. We next up have Jim McBride. Jim is a railway historian and a board member of the Donegal Railway Heritage Centre. He's been involved in railway preservation in Ireland for over 30 years and has recently published a book, The Lochswilly Remembered. I'm going to hold up my copy here, looking back at the Lochswilly Railway. I've been enjoying reading it myself, and I can tell you it's full of fascinating photos and history. Jim, you're very welcome. Thanks. I'll just, there, you're off mute.
Yep, sorry.
Sorry, Jim.
Good morning, John. Thanks for the
Good morning.
kind words.
Thanks for joining us. Jim, you have very kindly provided us as well with a couple of slides to illustrate our conversation. So we'll get those up on screen as we chat. But Jim, I wondered if you could tell me, first of all, how rail provision on the island of Ireland and in particular in the Northwest used to look.
Well, it's one of those things, John. It's historically pre-partition. Donegal alone, there were 200 miles of railway in County Donegal alone. And at the Londonderry Lochswilly Railway Company, and County Donegal Railway Company and the Great Northern Railway Company, you could get a train from Strabane to Dublin in 3 hours, 40 minutes in a modern rail car service, including a dining car. And places like Strabane really missed out. And the line, a partition had a major effect because it really condemned, many of those railways found themselves cut off by partition from the natural hinterlands between Derry and Donegal, and that contributed to decline. Plus, Strabane had a very vicious anti-railway policy pursued from the 1950s up to 1965, which meant there used to be 17 railway lines across the border. Today, there's just one that serves from Belfast to Dublin, and that is it. And what we have recently launched in the Donegal Railway Heritage Centre is a railway heritage map, kindly funded by the Donegal County Council, and that's to really encourage these things, people to take an interest in the history of the area, and maybe encourage tourists and local people to go and see things themselves. It's amazing what still survives today. So that's to help to promote it, and we include Derry, of course, in that. And so really historically, Derry had 4 railway stations at one time. Today it's but 1. Historically, you get to Derry to Belfast in 2 different directions, and today we've got 1. And you see yourself that the railways were a lifeblood to all these remote areas of County Donegal. As a result of the closure of railways, most of these areas have very poor public transport or no public transport still today. And it also helps cut off Derry from its natural hinterland in Donegal and vice versa. So what I really want to talk about is, the last major railway closure in Northern Ireland was a line from Derry through Strabane, through Omagh, through Dungan on the Port of Down. And that was 75 miles of main line closed on February 14, 1965. On this line, I challenged William Craig, the Minister of Home Affairs, with this history of it many years ago as an historian, and asked him why did he close that line. He says, because it went through Donegal. And that line served the towns of villages of St. Johnstone and Carrigan, etc., went into the banks of the River Foyle. And so he's worked extensively in the history of these railways and their history. We got the DCSDC's website. Over 90% of the line from Derry to Strabane on banks of the Foyle in Donegal are still open and intact today. As we can hear John Glass earlier on today, welcoming plans to protect the track beds on the northern side of the border, because the track beds are protecting the Donegal side of the border. Now, that train, Janan, from Derry to Strabane took between 15 and 20 minutes non-stop between Derry and Strabane. Imagine we had that today. You'd have this gridlock in the roads for starter, and the trains are vital. As Steve Field mentioned, Steve, railways can help achieve climate change targets as well. And they're environmentally forward transport. They take people off the roads, cars to the road. They'll take freight traffic off the road. And also, they're great for the people who have no access to road transport. Areas of maybe could be social deprivation. It could be the fact that maybe, disabilities. They're very good for young families. And this train is certainly the way forward. We look across Europe, and they're investing in railways. In the last 20 years, railways are reopened in England, Scotland, and Wales, and the Irish Republic. Only in Northern Ireland we failed to reopen any railways. And Steve failed to point out that there's also a scheme to open line between Portadown and Armagh as well. And that's a potential link on the Monaghan, etc., filling the gaps in the network. So 3,500 kilometres of railway are open in Ireland to passenger traffic. Of that, just over 300 kilometres are in Northern Ireland. And that's a major indictment. So it's not just the 5 former plantation counties that are left railless. There's a whole region that's been cut off. And also areas like County Down and Armagh have also been left railways. So I very much welcome what the council's been saying. I've been campaigning since 2001 with my good friend Ian McCann and the late Colin Joyce. We campaigned together, to put forward the idea that at that time the civil service wanted to close the railways down beyond Cllr, and we argued that it would leave Derry completely cut off economically. To me, as a historian, it's no coincidence that the troubles helped break out in Strabane, the northwest, because that was a knock-on effect of those decisions taken in 1965. Strabane, at one time, had 5 railways, today it's none. These areas completely economically cut off. They promised the councils of Omagh, when they launched the case against the closure line in 1965, that Omagh would have a motorway. Well, the government motorway, Omagh's still waiting, so Strabane. And it's no question that civil rights movement broke out in those areas in the northwest, because these regions were now completely economically and socially cut off from the rest of Northern Ireland, and they're already cut off thanks to partition from the County Donegal, etc. So I think people should be looking forward at taking things forward. We have to bring Northern Ireland to the 21st century. We have to end the anti-rail bias that the civil service shows. They make it impossible for Translink to make minor improvements to the service without some economic appraisal job. So, for example, Ballerina is less than 5 miles from the valley. Ballerina has 2 trains every hour. Translink was told us it cost £250,000 with an extra bus link in Liver Valley Town Centre and Ballerina. They have to go jump through the hoops. They're an integrated transport company. They shouldn't have to jump through the hoops. We are inadequately funded. For every £100 per person Scotland gets for public transport, we get less than 40 pence. We get 16% of the UK average if you include London in terms of public transport head of population. We've had decades of underinvestment, and the railway is well used and well liked by all people, and it's the best way of getting around and getting people, because you travel by train, it's environmentally friendly, and it's good facilities for people with disabilities, older people, younger people. They welcome the train, and not everybody wants to get a bus, and not everybody finds it easy to board a bus, for example, as well. So I think the council will be welcoming a strategy. In terms of Letterkenny, I've always argued personally that there's 2 rail routes in Derry to Letterkenny. Both have been overdeveloped and be probably physically impossible to reinstate out of those 2 routes. But certainly, I believe that a spur line from St. Johnstone towards Letterkenny would be a way forward, and St. Johnstone would be part of the line to Strabane, and more importantly, Strabane and Lifford, a joint station. because being the EU, you can still attract cross-border funding. So I think people should forget about the past. We're not going to bring back the steam trains. It's just modern trains. Okay, the Great Northern Railway offered a modern railway service. So the UTA killed that off in 1965. And we're have a legacy of neglect and underrepresentation. And Derry's been very badly hit. The map shows you what we used to have 100 years ago. And today, none of those railways exist. Today, Donegal has no railways. And the Donegal Railway Heritage Centre, we're out to promote the memory and the heritage of County Donegal and the various railways that served it, and Derry as well by default. In the past, there's 2 railways from Derry to Strabane. Today, there's none. So I think, as well as promoting the existing route, I think the council should look for direct Derry-Dublin rail services. It's ridiculous. You get the 8:38 train from the Waterside Station, you arrive in Central 10:40, and the 10:35 trains departed to Dublin just 5 minutes earlier. That's a lack of joined-up thinking. And we should be looking at doing those things. We should offer this maybe a trial basis through Derry-Dublin rail service. That can be done using existing rolling stock at no additional cost. So by the time we get rid of the dead hand of the civil service, by the time the council forced the politicians, forced government to take rail seriously, particularly in the Northwest, and to work with the Irish government to end this lack of joined-up thinking, to end up this neglect or this unexpected effect of 100 years of partition that we're still living with today. Thank you, Will. Thank you, Janan. Thank you, all panelists, for listening. Welcome to questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jim. That is really interesting, and I think we're going to have some time in the Q&A to delve even deeper into the kind of the cross-border aspect and what the future of rail could look like, Jim. So at this stage, I'd like to welcome in Stuart Bell, who's joining us from the Scottish Borders Council. And Jim, we will include you in our Q&A at the end, if that's okay, because we'd love to hear more about the Donegal side of things, being so close to Donegal in the Northwest. So Stuart Bell is joining us from the Scottish Borders Council to tell us about the reopening of his local railway line after decades of closure. Hi, Stuart.
Hi.
A very warm welcome from the Northwest to you.
Thank you very much. Loving the event.
Oh, great. Thank you so much for joining us, Stuart. We're really looking forward to hearing from Stuart about how the reopening has impacted the local economy and community in the Scottish Borders, and any advice he would have for us here in the Northwest, anything he might have done, like to have seen done differently if we could rewind the clock. Stuart has worked for 35 years in operations improvement and operational management in manufacturing businesses, mainly in the electronics sector. In 2012, Stuart was elected to represent his constituents and the SNP as Scottish Borders Councillor for the ward of Tweedale East. Have I pronounced that right, Stuart?
Yeah, that's good. That's great.
He served for 5 years as executive member for economic development and subsequently as leader of the opposition. So Stuart, you're very welcome again. Stuart, you were executive member for economic development, as I've said, at Scottish Borders Council during that reopening. How have things changed since then for the local economy and just for local people in general as a result of the reopening?
I'll get to answer your question, Jinan, in just a minute, but let me just, I need to give a little bit of introduction and a little bit of context, because having read the All Ireland Rail Review and also listened to the event, the first half of the event, I can see the distinction between our circumstances here in the Scottish Borders and what you're dealing with in Ireland. Let me just say to Steve and Jim, loved your input. Love the energy, Steve. That's you're going to need it, and boy, it's important. And let me, in the nicest possible way, say to both of you, all progress depends on the unreasonable man, and in this day of equality, also the unreasonable woman. You have to push hard to get somewhere. Just to give you some context, the local authority of the Scottish Borders is 4,700-ish square kilometres with a population of 115,000. So it's a different scale in terms of rurality from some parts of the area of Derry and Strabane. Our towns are, I always say, strung like a string of pearls along the Tweed and its tributaries. And we're a local authority of small towns. So the largest is 14,000, so of the size of Strabane. The railway that was reopened was part of what was called the Waverley Line. The Waverley ran from 98 miles, ran from Edinburgh to Carlisle, opened in 1862, closed in 1969. And we got 35 miles of it reopened in 2015, and we call it the Borders Railway. So we've got reopened a section of a longer railway that was closed. That Borders Railway spans 3 local authorities, so Edinburgh, the Midlothian and the Scottish Borders. There are 6 stations in Edinburgh and Midlothian in the first 10 miles of the railway, and 3 stations, including the terminuses, in the Borders part of the railway in the last 20 miles. So in that respect, we've got some similarities to the relationship between Derry and Cllr and Strabane. Edinburgh's 500,000 population. Strabane's bigger than Cllr's bigger than any of the towns in the Borders. So there's some similarity, and very much that Borders Railway was about connecting borderers to Edinburgh. It was seen as, and I paraphrase, taking borderers to jobs. So it was seen in that sense as a commuting railway. And what have we seen in terms of economic development? That's a dead simple answer I can give to that question: not enough. Part of the reason we've not seen enough is it takes 5 or 10 years for that economic development to work through. And in kind of answering your question, I think I need to draw a distinction between outcomes, outputs, and objectives. So in outputs, I think the railway has achieved its objectives in terms of growing passenger miles. The usage has doubled in the first 4 years. And if I give you one example, Galashiels, which is a principal town in the Borders and close to the terminus of the Borders Railway, that has run at a level of passenger usage which was forecast at 25,000 journeys a year. And the reality is 10 times that. So it's a phenomenal difference from what was originally forecast in terms of the volume. Survey data says that 15% of the people that are using the railway did not have a car, and therefore those are in effect new that they would have used the bus, but they're changed journeys and they did not have a car. In Midlothian, I said there's 3 local authorities. In Midlothian, which is close to Edinburgh, there's been a massive increase in house building. The rate of house building has effectively doubled since the railway came in. Now, I'm going to quote a kind of odd philosopher, von Clausewitz is maybe not in everybody's reading list for philosophers. He was a Prussian general, but I'm always reminded that he said, complex phenomena are never monocausal. So it's always kind of difficult to identify which of the various causes actually produce the impact. The rate of house building has doubled in Midlothian, and over 50% of new residents, when they're surveyed, had said the railway was a factor in them buying a house in that location. And intriguingly, we've got a lovely further education college called Borders College in Galashiels. And I picked up anecdotal data within a year of the railway opening, which has been verified by facts that after 2 years of the railway opening, there was an increase of 74% in the registrations at the Borders College. And I know, because I talked to some of them, it was people from other parts, including Midlothian, who were traveling out to Borders College in Galashiels and Borders College for further education rather than traveling into Edinburgh. So in output terms, the intention of the railway was to provide a commuter link. It's been a phenomenal success in those output terms, and that was the objective. We may come on to the complexities of how you get one of these things to work. That was clearly the objective. The objective was to be in a position to take people off cars, off the bus, onto the railway in order to get them into Edinburgh. But as executive member for economic development, I was always saying I didn't just want the railway to be taking the borderers to jobs. I wanted it to be bringing jobs to the borders. Now, in that respect, we are having some success. We've certainly seen a growth in tourism. And I know that I can relate that back to some of the changes that have come about as a consequence of the railway. And at Tweed Bank, which is the terminus of our railway, we've actually got quite a developing program of construction of premises for businesses that have already signed up to move into the area. But the outcome in terms of improving economic prosperity and reducing the salary gap that we've got here in the borders, the outcome I don't expect to see for the next 5 or 10 years. So my short answer to your question, Jinan, is not enough.
Great, that makes sense, Stuart. Thank you. And I think those facts and figures really help illustrate it. So thanks for sharing those with us. Just conscious of time, we've just a minute or two left before we want to get into that audience Q&A and bring the rest of the panelists back.
Good.
But I really wanted to know, Stuart, was there anything that you could, any tips or advice you could give to us here in the Northwest to really make these big ambitions we have a reality, or anything you guys would have done differently if you had the chance again?
Those are complex questions. First of all, and I'm saying this to Steve and all the other campaigners, don't give up, right? So it's a long haul, don't give up. Our campaign for the Borders Rail was a vital part of getting the railway into the Scottish borders. And there was a dynamic went on. There was a tension between the campaigners and the establishment. Now, you've had some lovely people on in the first half of this program, but they're very much the governments, the local authority, the rail management authorities. To a degree, that's the establishment, right? There is a tension, and it can be a very constructive tension between the campaigners and the establishment. The challenge for the establishment is that campaigners always want to do an awful lot of things, and they've got to distill out of it the core of what is actually going to generate a change. So the campaigners have to persuade the establishment, and that means there needs to be clarity of goals. And one of the challenges for Steve Bradley is that he has a lot of goals, and a number of them are really very strong. But each goal has to be associated with a credibility of analysis in order to generate potential power support, potential political and power support. Our railway, let me just give you some numbers in terms of some of the implicit challenges. Our railway, our 35 miles in 1995 was estimated to cost 75 million. The final bill was 350 million. Yeah, so there's a phenomenal amount of convincing needed to find 350 million in order to put in 30 miles of track. And let me just touch on one thing that I thought was very important that two things that John Glass said that I thought were very interesting. One was there's an important role for the local authorities in protecting the solum, protecting the route of former railways where you're opening the railways. 40% of that cost of our railway was reconstructing it where a road had been built over it, or businesses had been built on it, or shops had been built on it. 40% of the cost was restoring the line because the line had been developed. But let me just strike something else that John Glass was talking about. He and a number of people have been talking about improving connectivity. Improving connectivity, it has to be clear what it's for. Is it for passengers? Or is it for freight, which I hardly heard mentioned today? Or is it for tourism? So, and that's part of what I mean in terms of clarity of goals. So the campaigners have to take all the energy that they've got, and Steve's got a lot of it. Steve's absolutely right that a single track line cannot mix commuter and intercity traffic. Absolutely right. In my experience, that won't work, right? But that energy and enthusiasm has to be translated into very clear goals in order to be able to generate the political support to get the power and to get the money. Sorry, long answer.
No, it's really interesting, Stuart. Thanks again for your time. I can't thank you enough for sharing those insights. It's really useful. I hope the rest of the people attending will agree just to get that first-hand experience of it. I'd like to bring Jim and Steve back in, our campaigners, and we're also Thankful that Karen from Derry City and Strabane District Council, John Glass from Translink and Jackie Robinson from DFI are also going to be on hand if they need to come in with it to respond to any queries or make any comments as well. So I can see some of our panel back joining us again. Steve and Jim, I wondered if you had any questions for Stuart yourselves after, in light of what he was saying.
Well, I was going to say that Stuart was it's very interesting. I've been to the Borders Rail campaign. It's like the Derry line campaign. The projected figures, for the line, the Derry line upgrade, the government gives projected passenger growth figures. We achieved the 2035 figures in 3 years, Janan. He talks about it opened up an inaccessible region. The parallels, I think, the Derry Road are just beyond belief. They're able to see a stretch of line Northern Ireland, the loop line from Derry through Strabane down as far as Omagh. That's the reality of what they've achieved in Scotland. And they were always told it couldn't be done. But there's the proof it can be done. And we want the same thing to happen here. And the other thing with Stuart, line from Derry to Strabane, by the way, there's hardly anything missing in the whole route from Derry to Strabane. So one house and one huge factory to go. That's it, and you can get delivered.
Good, that's interesting, Jim.
Yeah, it can be delivered, Jim.
It can be delivered, and the line from Derry to Strabane, check out the Union Station's website. The track beds are totally clear as far as the outskirts of Strabane. Totally clear.
Good.
And shut in 1965. I was built in 1847. So there you are, Stuart.
And Steve, sorry, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, if I could add that. Firstly, thank you very much, Stuart, for the presentation and really good advice in there as well. We've used the campaign for Border Rail as kind of like our poster child for what can be achieved, because what we find very often in Ireland, in Northern Ireland, which are very car-dependent societies, there's no denying that, and the figures show that. Belfast is the most tive large city in all of the UK. What we find is people are like, oh, sure, you're not going to get rail back here. Why, don't waste your time, don't bother. We've had 2 generations in the west of Northern Ireland who think that rail is something that happens elsewhere. And it's hard to change that mindset. What was really powerful in what Stuart was saying there is the largest town on the route that they reopened is smaller than Strabane. That's the largest town. And we're talking about restoring rail to places that are much bigger than Strabane, such as Omagh and Letterkenny. So if you can do it in the borders of Scotland, we can do it in the borders of Ireland. But one thing I would like to put in as a caveat to all of this, I mentioned in my presentation that we need a sea change at Stormont and within the Northern Ireland Civil Service. And we met with the Chief Executive of Fermanagh Omagh Council last year. And bear in mind, to get a rail connection from the northwest to Dublin, it has to go through Omagh. And the Chief Executive told us that she'd been effectively instructed not to include rail in their council's transport strategy. So we have on the one hand, Derry Strabane District Council saying it wants to restore rail to certain places. And then I assume without them knowing, the people in charge of the infrastructure in Northern Ireland are effectively telling the neighbouring council not to include anything in their transport strategy. And if it's not in the strategy, it's less likely to happen. So this is why we need a sea change at what's happening at the top level, because if there were different councils demanding different things along the campaign or the border rail route, I'm sure it would have been much harder to deliver.
Yes, let me just reinforce that point. We have our own legislative process, and to go back to my von Clausewitz quote in terms of complex phenomena are never monocausal. One of the reasons that we actually got to where we got to was not just because of the campaign, but because of the new Scottish Parliament that, in the nicest possible way, was looking for something to do that was focused on its clear area of responsibility, and it was actually inventing processes. And the campaign for Borders Rail and the local authorities raised a public petition, and the first public petitions meeting that was held outside Holyrood was held in Galashiels to look at the public petition for the Borders Railway. So the campaign managed to develop a momentum that locked into a new legislature that was actually, to summarize, was looking for something to legislate on. But the promoters were the 3 local authorities. So the 3 local authorities and Railtrack and ScotRail, along with the Scottish Executive, were the promoters of the bill that went through the Scottish Parliament, and that unity in terms of the local authorities was turned out to, I think, to be quite important in terms of getting cross-party support for the bill.
Yeah.
I go in there, Stuart. Stuart, you mentioned about rail freight. There's been no rail freight in Northern Ireland since 2002. For 20 years, there's been no rail freight. No rail across in Europe, no rail freight. It's Malta and Iceland, and they have no railways. So, and the other thing in terms of promoting things here, Scotland, I want, was a programme of reinstating railways. Scotland's a programme of electrifying railways. We can't even get one railway line reopened here in the last 20 years, not one.
So if I can be cheeky, Jeananne, what do Jackie and John think about the freight opportunities in terms of rail in Ireland?
Well, there's and Stuart, in the Irish Republic, there's rail freight, but there's none in Northern Ireland. There's no cross-border rail freight, none at all.
Jackie, what did you want to add about rail freight?
I'll let John come in on this one as well, but it's one of the things that we're looking at within the All Ireland Rail Review is the potential for rail freight. And there have already been some comments right back at the beginning of this seminar about linkages into, for example, Foyle Port and City of Derry Airport and things like that are very important in terms of freight. So it's about whether we can make that work. And that's one of the things that the consultation process will look at, the consultants will look at, to see whether that there is viability in that as an option going forward.
Well, I think it should be the political will to make it work, and it should be offered as an option, as actually EU policy to transfer this modal shift from road to rail, which other people have failed to mention, for both passengers and freight, to create the modal shift.
John, did you want to add anything about freight from Translink's point of view?
Yeah, I think it's important the All Ireland study looks at that, and we're talking about removing cars off the road. HGVs are the other thing that we need to consider, and the emissions that they produce. So we need to look at it seriously.
Okay, I just want to read out a few of the Q&A comments just to see where we're up to on those. And just a reminder to attendees, if you do have any questions, we've got the whole panel here in front of us now. So if you have anything you want to add in. A question for Stuart here. Have you got any plans to expand the line further?
That's a fabulous challenge. I'm going to a council meeting on Thursday when we're going to be considering the final version of our local development plan. And one of the issues that's going to come up in the local development plan is protection of the Solum between Tweed Bank and the border, but if all of the railway line down towards Carlisle. Because we think it's really important to protect that Solum as part of a process of opening up the possibility for the Borders Railway to extend to the full length of what was the Waverley line between Edinburgh and Carlisle. And that's quite complicated to do. It'll cost a phenomenal amount of money, but we've got to be sure that the local development plan actually protects the track bed, so that we don't end up with extra costs as a result of development on that track bed. So yes, there are aspirations, and the campaign for Borders Rail that Steve has referred to, and I've also referred to, they're campaigning for onwards to Carlisle.
Jeananne, if I could just add something very quickly to that.
Yeah,
Stuart
sure.
mentioned about sort of protecting and sanitising the track bed. We've a real problem in Derry at the moment, whereby under appeal, social housing provider Clonmel got permission to put 39 social housing units right on the track bed next to Craigavon Bridge, which effectively is essential to put any rail south of Waterside Railway Station. We've been flagging this up in the media, we've been pushing this, we've met with all parties. We're a bit disappointed that the council have effectively stood back a bit and acted as messenger between ourselves and Clonmel on this. We need the council to provide clear and proactive, even aggressive leadership on this issue. If we want rail to continue south from Waterside Railway Station, I cannot see how that will happen if there's a building created on the old track bed on Victoria Road. Therefore, the council need to be knocking down every door to get this issue resolved. and we don't see that hunger in them at the moment. It's been left to ourselves, a ragtag group of community volunteers, to try and sort this out. We cannot have that level of discussions with Clonmel. We cannot discuss money and land and things like that with them because we have nothing to offer and we're not a key stakeholder. The council needs to grab this issue by the scruff of the neck and resolve it, because otherwise a key door to rail expansion in Derry will be closed, and that will impact counties Tyrone, Fermanagh and Donegal.
Okay, Karen, did you want, sorry, Jim has raised his hand there. Maybe Jim, just tell us what you want to say and then we redirect to Karen from council.
No, it's just very simple, John. I did a survey 2 years ago for the website, the Shoe Station, of both lines from Derry to Strabane. The line went through new buildings at Donegal, and that line's been heavily rebuilt and built over. It was built as a branch line to 3-foot gauge. The line from Derry to Strabane through St Johnson and Carrigas has not been built over, and that was originally a double track main line for most of the way, and that was relatively clear the whole way towards Port Hall. And it's only that bridge the army took out in 71, and that was it. And so, but I mean, the survey's there. Check the website. The photographs are there. It's all been done. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. Karen, would you like to say anything on behalf of the council on that Clonmel issue?
Yeah, well, all I can say is that we're aware of it and we're working with stakeholders to try and see what resolution can be brought to the situation. Thanks.
Thank you, Karen. Again, going back to our Q&A panel here, there's loads of comments coming in and I'll not be able to read them all out. So everyone attending, I'd urge you to have a wee read through as we go along as well. Let's see, Jackie, there's a question here for yourself. What's your response to the charge that Fermanagh and Omagh Council should not include rail in their plans?
To be honest with you, that's because I did hear that and I put a note in my diary to follow, or in my book to follow that up. I hadn't been aware of that, and on that basis, I wouldn't really like to comment.
Sure. We were talking earlier about that railway line in England that had the 9-month reopening. I'm just scrolling up now because people have filled us in. John, I know you were wondering what was this rail line? Jim, sorry, while I'm looking that up, you tell me what you want to say.
I can tell you, that was approved in February last year. 25 miles line, so-called Dartmoor line, was approved by Boris Johnson last year in February and opened at the end of November. It's fast track, 9 months, which 11 miles of line were this huge freight line. And the whole line was basically rebuilt. It's facing 9 months from start to finish, new signalling, new track, etc. So it shows you what you can do when the political will is there. Here we spent 10 years trying to get phase 3 delivered to complete the final upgrade of the rail line to Derry. In England, they did all 9 months. So we're way behind the time here. We would love to see some sort of joint up thinking. We'd like to see a government programme of railway reinstatement jointly with the Dublin government. There should be more joined up thinking than there is, and there's still this partitionist view. And Stuart, I'm a historian, so I appreciate your quote by von Clausewitz.
Thank you, Jim. I'm not going to try and pronounce that philosopher's name.
This is German history.
I won't interject, but I know if there's anyone that can, it'll be you, Jim. But tell me, there's a question here about, this might be one for either Jackie or John, is there a high level estimate of how much opening rail between Derry and Strabane to Omagh would cost?
You're looking at 10 million a mile, roughly as a bulb, especially Derry Strabane, because the track bed is quite clear. So that'll be phase 1. But we need a proper feasibility study, like the Port and Armagh project was called a feasibility study. That was taking 20 years to get a feasibility study done. Sure, that's hard to believe.
No, I agree with Jim. There would need to be a proper feasibility study done to estimate the cost and the removal or the clearing of the existing track bed, if required, Jim. So that would be a must first to establish that cost.
Well, John, the good news is the track bed's basically clear the whole way.
Yeah.
It's to Strabane. Yeah. You got one huge factory and one house to bypass. That's it. You get to Strabane. Hard to believe.
Janan, if I could just add 2 points to this. Firstly, large-scale infrastructure isn't cheap, and we have to acknowledge that and accept that. There is no way to extend and reopen railway routes on the cheap. It's going to cost money, and it's about, do we prioritise that as a mode of transport, or are we going to do what we've done for the last 50, 60 years in Northern Ireland and throw all our money onto the table next to roads? That's the first thing. Secondly, the good news within that is that rail is substantially cheaper than building roads. So all other things being equal, like for like, as Jim mentioned, it's about 10 million a mile roughly to create a new rail, and which is about half the cost of creating new road. Now, luckily, some of the former track beds of areas we want to reopen already exist, so you could use those. There are other areas where you may want to straighten out the track or take a different route. But the bottom line is, mile for mile, rail is cheaper than road. And what really annoys us as campaigners is people in Northern Ireland always talk about roads and very specific roads, and we get that. We get the need for better connectivity in all forms of transport across the Northwest, and people are anxious about the A6 and the A5 and things like that. You never hear those people questioning where will the money come from for those roads. But as soon as you mention rail, people are like, well, where's the money going to come from for that? And the answer is the same people who provide the money for the roads, which A, are more expensive, and B, you don't question. So we need a bit of parity here, and understanding that it's going to cost money, and acceptance that there's no other way to do it. But the good news being that rail is a relatively cheap form of major infrastructure, especially when compared to dual carriageways and motorways.
Thanks, Steve. I think it's just looking at the panel here, it's fantastic to get everybody on board discussing this and getting into the detail of it. I think as Stuart said, it's, you know, when campaigners are working with the legislators, there's definitely productive discussions to be had, and hopefully you'll agree that we've had a chance to get that conversation continued today. We've got some links, as I said, along the side there, contact details for various stakeholders who've spoken today. Just before we go and before we wrap up, I just wanted to bring in those poll results. Again, the question in the poll, I think we've had 100% participation, which is great. Which of the 6 all-island rail review goals are you most interested in? Now, this is where my statistician skills are put to the test. We can see that improving all-island connectivity between major cities is the big one. That's the one that everyone's sort of in agreement with, or most people are most passionate about. Then we've got enhancing regional and rural accessibility, followed by, I think, contributing to decarbonisation and encouraging sustainable mobility are pretty much on an equal footing there. As is fostering economic activity, they're all roughly around the same. And finally, at the bottom of the heap is achieving economic and financial feasibility. So I've wondered what the panel thought about that. That the most important one in the view of people attending today is improving all-island connectivity between major cities. Would that be something that we would be in agreement on, or is there anyone that disagrees with that result?
No, I think it's very important. I pointed the example of the lack of joined-up thinking in terms of the Derry, Belfast, Dublin rail connections. The lack of joined-up thinking. And that should be a no-brainer for everyone in the council. Translink, I know Translink are working to upgrade the enterprise service, and if it was a more regular timetable and it departs in unpredictable times, and it means there's a lack of connectivity. And if we had even the Derry, Belfast, Dublin rail service, you're looking 3 of the 4 biggest cities in Ireland. That's a no-brainer.
Thank you, Jim. Does anyone else want to add to that?
I just think I think that's it's very useful to have done the survey. I think that was a good move in terms of what you're trying to articulate today. I think one of the challenges is that the lowest scoring, in inverted commas, of achieving economic and financial feasibility is will probably, from the legislator's perspective, be the most important because they'll look at a cost benefit analysis and say, well, okay, what's the cost benefit ratio? At its height, we had a cost benefit ratio of 1.44 to 1 for the Borders Railway, and just before it opened, the cost benefit ratio was 0.5 to 1. And if it's break even is 1 to 1, if you see what I mean. Yeah. And one of the big challenges is to achieve economic and financial feasibility in order to be able to justify going back to the issue of finding the funding. So that's quite intriguing, and it has to be included in the mix. But the other one I wanted to comment on was contribute to decarbonisation. If you displace traffic from road to rail, whichever measurement you use, and I've seen a number, basically the CO2 per passenger mile between bus and car, more or less the same, and rail is a factor of 10 to 1. So even without electrification, you've got 10% of the data says that you've got 10% of the carbon dioxide emissions if you transfer the vehicles and the movements, the passenger miles from road to rail. So in a curious way, people who might be extremely concerned about the environment can be relaxed, because simply running with new rail links that are moving traffic and travel from other mechanisms, i.e. bus or car, will contribute to improving to tackling climate change and improving the environment. So the fact that's not top of the pops in terms of your poll is not critical, because it'll come along with the investment.
Thank you, Stuart. And I think I should also point out, of course, it's not a scientific poll, and it's not an official one. It's just out of interest for today. But Jackie, did you have any feedback on that in terms of the 6 goals and which people view as most important, or maybe are just more passionate about?
Yeah, it's really quite interesting. I don't think for me it was a big surprise that improving intercity connections came out top. I think Stuart's right. I think an unintended consequence of doing that is decarbonisation, and we will build that in. It's one of the comments was around social, economic and environmental benefits and how they are built into to any business case going forward. That's something that we will do, and the importance of decarbonisation will be included in that. Interestingly, and I think what this goes back to for me is the importance of what comes out of the All Ireland Rail Review. And this goes back to something Stuart was saying about the establishment via the vis-a-vis the campaigners and how that dynamic works. So the Rail Review will hopefully provide us with a clear vision and a prioritisation for rail improvement across the island, and it will help ensure that investment is made taken that strategically. And I think that's very important. Whenever we are talking about major investment decisions, it's important that they are taken at a strategic level and not piecemeal.
Thank you, Jackie.
Go
on, Steve. Yep.
If I could just add to that, it was interesting to see what came out top of the poll. It makes perfect sense in terms of how rail tends to function. Rail basically works best at moving relatively large numbers of people between populations settlements, and that has sort of 3 knock-on impacts. Firstly, it necessitates what some people may find difficult choices. If you ask tomorrow, people want to go back to where we were in 1850 odd, whereby every village and bend in the road had a railway station. Yeah. Unfortunately, we're not going back to those days because it's just not realistic. And if you're in tune with sort of, if you follow this stuff in Northern Ireland, you hear a lot of places mentioned where people would love to see rail return, but the problem is they're not near a large population centre, and they're not en route between 2 large population centres. So realistically, the chances of them getting rail back are probably relatively slim. And loath as I am to mention places, I would mention, for example, Downpatrick, Newcastle, Ballycastle, places which, Newtown Stuart in Derry Strabane is on the routes between Derry and Portadown, so has a much better chance of seeing rail return, even though it's a village, than somewhere like Ballycastle does. So there's going to have to be tough choices made, because we can't roll back the clock to the Victorian era. Things have moved on. We're not going to get that level of rail connectivity. So tough choices need to be made. And our submission to the All Ireland Rail Review came up with the proposal of having a principle-led approach on this to provide clarity and transparency. And we suggested that the principle should be that any town with a population of over 10,000 in Northern Ireland, there should be a presumption in favour of rail being returned there. And there will be caveats. As I said, if they're not near a big population centre or en route, if they're not a big population centre themselves or not en route between 2 big population centres, then they may not realistically get rail back. And B, even if they're smaller than 10,000, they may still get rail because they are en route between population centres, or they're a big tourism destination, or they have a university or something like that. But we think it would be helpful to have this clarity of principle, so everybody in Northern Ireland can kind of understand where has a chance of rail being restored. And for us, it was looking at what's called a medium-sized town in Northern Ireland, which is 10,000 population or above. Two other very quick things on this.
Very quick, Steve. Sorry, just because I've got one eye on the clock, but yeah, just very quickly, please.
The interurban connectivity bit goes back to the point they made about the Derry-Belfast line tries to do two things which it can't do, one of which is to be a commuter service for Belfast. That should be an intercity route, and we need that double tracked to enable that to happen alongside the local services. And finally, it was good that the Minister ensured that Derry is now included in the proposals for a higher speed route across the island. Previously, it was only going to be Belfast, Dublin, Cork. It's good to have Derry in there because, again, what the people are asking for here is greater urban connectivity. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Jim, did you, Karen has her hand raised, so I want to give Karen an opportunity. Did you just want to come in very briefly on that?
It's just I got to leave you, Jeanne, because I've got a bunch of year 12s to look after, so I got to leave these guys. But thanks for the chance of discussion. I've got to go into I'm back to the day job, Jeanne.
Oh, thank you, Jim. Thank you very much.
All the best, guys.
They're as well behaved as we've been.
I wish. I'll take care.
Thank you, Jim.
Thanks. Bye.
Jim, of course, is a history teacher as well as all the other strings to his bow. Karen, you wanted to come in now, please.
Yeah, I think Jeanne just certainly just to sum up from Council's perspective in terms of, you know, the future of rail provision in our area, and really the opportunity that we have now, and hopefully, as Jackie had said, the second highest number of responses came from the city and district, which is fantastic to see. Again, you know, we have an opportunity here to balance regional development, to tackle climate change, to reverse the economic underperformance of our region. I think what we as a council want to push, and certainly no different from some of the stakeholders and campaigners, is that we can become a net contributor to the economy of the island, rather than somewhere where that costs the public purse money. And certainly it's an opportunity to do that if we are serious about it, if we put the investment needed, and it needs to be on a decide and provide basis, and not necessarily looking at a traditional business case model, looking at passenger numbers. And I think we've all discussed that, and it's fantastic that to get that recognised, that's a common theme that we're all agreed on. So that's really just where I wanted to sum up from a council perspective today. Thanks.
Thank you, Karen, and thank you, Council, for facilitating this event. That's going to obviously bring us to the end of our Q&A. I think there might have been a few questions or comments that we didn't get around to. We did our best, but as I said, there are links and details in the chat box of where you can find more information and kind of keep this conversation going, because I feel like it's been a really interesting and constructive one today. I'd like to thank the Council for organising this event, as I said, our Mayor, Alderman Graham Warke, Ministers Mallon and Ryan, and all our speakers for being with us today. Thank you so much for your contribution, and thank you at home for joining us. I hope you'll agree that it has been a really interesting discussion, and we'll continue to explore how to transform our rail provision here in the Northwest. So thank you, everyone, and goodbye for now.